Welcome to Metroid Theories, where I talk about the Metroid series. Metroid Dread left off with an ambiguous ending, mainly in regard with the way in which the parasitized Quiet Robe seemingly sacrificed himself for the benefit of Samus. In this video, I will analyze two views, and then provide my own view, a view that I've neither seen, nor heard others mention before. This view has been kept hidden by me until now. I shall first provide some preliminary groundwork about the X-parasites before considering each view. The X first appear in Metroid Fusion. During her return to planet SR-388, Samus had been asked by the Galactic Federation to guard a research team, which had been dispatched by Biologic. The purpose of this mission was to investigate SR-388 after the extinction of the Metroids, ascertain its current ecosystem, and to collect samples. During this time, Samus was attacked by an X, an organism she had never encountered before. Fusion's Japanese manual describes the X as the protozoa of SR-388. They are gelatinous, parasitic organisms capable of infecting other organisms, living, dead, or parts thereof. They access the living host's memory center, which I interpret to mean the hippocampus. This is done to acquire information, before which the X begins to erode the host's neural circuits and nerve center, eventually killing them. Along with obtaining their host's genetic information and memories, they take on a form of aggressive mimicry, allowing them to impersonate their host. This makes it possible for them to approach or be approached by other potential prey. Lacking emotions, they instinctively put the highest priority on the preservation and expansion of their species, repeatedly dividing and merging, and mimicking to become stronger individuals. Now that I have provided a brief explanation of what the X are, I will turn my attention to the way both Adam and Samus characterize the X and Samus are an X during the events of fusion. Adam states that the SAX is quite destructive and certainly destructive. He refers to it as the source of the trouble, the one causing all the trouble, and the most troublesome. He regards it as the culprit and the enemy. Adam notes that the SAX's actions are deliberate. It's as if it's trying to sabotage Samus's goal to power up. Regarding the X, every data room Samus had used in the past had been rendered unusable, perhaps a manifestation of the X's defensive instincts. Yet, in spite of this negative view of the X and the SAX, Adam realized early on that someone had been guiding the incursion. He tells Samus, there is no denying that the SAX is intelligent, and states, although it is hard to imagine from its appearance, it is highly possible that the X has a very high level of intelligence. While it's later revealed that it was an X-mimicked operator who attempted to malfunction the main boiler in Sector 3 to trigger the self-destruct mechanism on the BSL, Adam initially pins the responsibility on the SAX, due to its level of intelligence. He even finds it self-defeating for an intelligent life form like the X to have attempted to cause the station to explode along with it and the rest of the X. Although Adam may be particularly intrigued by the SAX, and thinks the X is quite an interesting creature, and indeed a marvelous creature, this type of respect likely stems from the fact that he believes both are very dangerous. Now that I've covered Adam's characterization of the X and the SAX, I will turn my attention to the way Samus characterizes both, who leaves no room for praise or respect. Samus grants that the X accurately copy the appearance, knowledge, and power of their host, and that the SAX is her with the same capabilities as her in her best condition. Yet, she believes the SAX probably doesn't have the capacity to reason, that it's just her without a heart. To Samus, the SAX is just a deadly weapon that moves around on its own, a killing machine. When informed that her mission had come to an end, and that the Federation would be taking over, Samus is astounded. She asks Adam if the Federation is aware of the horrendous proliferation of the X, and the dangers of the SAX. She believes that a heartless creature, that is merely destructive, has no potential. Such notion of the X's potential is so absurd to her that she's willing to destroy SR-388 to bring the X to nothingness, even if she has to sacrifice herself. Having established the characterization of the X and the SAX, I will present the first view, which I will refer to as the escape hypothesis, and then offer my critique. Near the end of Dread, there are two Mawkin starships, which, during Samus's escape from planet ZDR, aren't present. It has been asserted that perhaps a couple or a few of the X have escaped by boarding these ships. This is essentially where the hypothesis ends. However, to strengthen this hypothesis, it is reasoned that Quiet Robe intended to neutralize Samus's Metroid state to preserve the X elsewhere. This supporting detail is based on an event in Fusion where Samus prevented the main boiler in Sector 3 from overheating. Adam says, this could have destroyed the station with the X in it, not to mention the SAX. Unusual for a self-preserving species like the X. Unless, your presence is an even greater threat, a threat to the existence of X elsewhere. Thus, it is reasoned that Quiet Robe had done a similar thing by dealing with Samus's Metroid state. Why doesn't this view hold? First, the supporting detail is entirely based on the English localization. The Japanese version never had Adam mention that the operator was attempting to deal with Samus because her presence is a threat to the existence of the X elsewhere. In fact, the next thing Adam says is, "This is a hypothesis." Even if the localization happened to be used, Adam never treated such detail as fact. Second, it's an assumption that the X escaped ZDR by boarding the Mocking starships. It's unclear as to why these ships weren't seen as Samus was escaping. It can be equally asserted that the destruction of a Tourash could have simply knocked the ships from their location. Consider the Golden Elite Chozo soldier, who can be seen leaping off one, causing it to buckle temporarily. If this Chozo could cause such occurrence, then it wouldn't be unreasonable for the explosion to have been enough to knock both down. Without corroborating evidence, the assumption that a few X escaped isn't sufficient to prove this argument correct. Third, this assumes that Quiet Robe was aware that at least one X boarded a ship to escape. Fourth, if it was the case that the X had escaped, it's curious as to why the Chozo soldiers on Hunubia hadn't boarded those ships, given there was plenty of time for them to have done so. Perhaps the same question could be asked about Samus's starship, not just in Dread, but also in Fusion. In Fusion, Dockerus and Edakuns were able to enter the starship, and Adam doesn't indicate that he had any way of preventing them from entering. He states, "These bird-like creatures and these monkey-like creatures have entered the ship." What prevented the SAX from boarding the starship? Aside from the fact that the only time an X ever shows up on the docking bay is only near the end of Fusion, it can only be speculated that the SAX's desire to kill Samus was more important than escaping. After all, as I've mentioned earlier, the X instinctively put the highest priority on the preservation and expansion of their species. Yet, how are they to expand if there's a threat that prevents them from preserving their own species? As for why the Chozo soldiers in Dread never entered the starship, I can only assume that they didn't know of its presence. Ravenbeak lured Samus to ZDR, expected her to make her way to Arteria, and under the guise of Adam, urged her to return to her ship. Given that Quiet Robe was the only other person to know of his plans, I don't think it's unreasonable that he also knew where the starship was. Finally, the idea of neutralizing Samus's Metroid state to preserve X elsewhere doesn't make sense. Adam is aware that if Samus touched the ship, she would drain its energy. She was essentially stuck on ZDR. Hearing this, and knowing that Samus was the last Metroid, Quiet Robe wouldn't need to neutralize Samus's Metroid state, since she wouldn't survive the destruction of ZDR. The second view argues that Quiet Robe wasn't in complete control of the X, but that he also didn't need to fight the influence of the X. Both shared the same goal, but for different reasons. I will refer to this as the two minds hypothesis. The argument starts by pointing out that the X recognize Metroids as their greatest threat, and if necessary, will sacrifice themselves for the preservation of their species. This is seen twice in Fusion. The first instance is during Samus's return to Sector 6, where she enters the top-secret area and discovers a Metroid breeding program. As she's exploring the area, there's a sudden commotion, which is caused by an SAX, who ignores Samus to deal with the Metroids instead. The second instance is near the very end of Fusion. The SAX ignores Samus, and instead deals with the Omega Metroid. However, it is argued that because it could not defeat the Omega Metroid, it allegedly allowed itself to be absorbed by Samus in order to defeat the Omega Metroid. In a similar vein, the X would want to neutralize Samus's Metroid state, thereby eliminating a major threat to its kind, even if Quiet Robe's purpose was to allow Samus to escape. Even though both the X and Quiet Robe had different rationales, their goal was the same: neutralize the Metroid state. This argument is interesting, but it's not without flaws. It could very well be the case that Quiet Robe was able to share a common goal with the Red X for different reasons, but like the escape hypothesis, it assumes that the X was dealing with Samus's Metroid state to preserve the presence of the X elsewhere, and like with the previous hypothesis, it assumes that the X wanted to deal with a Metroid threat before it during the imminent destruction of ZDR. Again, it would have known Samus was doomed with the planet, so why bother neutralizing her Metroid state? One may object to this by stating that the SAX was willing to fight the Omega Metroid during the BSL's imminent destruction, so it's not unreasonable that Quiet Robe would have wanted to deal with a Metroid threat during this time as well. The problem with this is that Quiet Robe could have simply left ZDR on Samus's starship. After all, it's revealed at the end of Fusion, this ship can only be activated by manual operation. Quiet Robe not only could have gotten rid of the last Metroid by stealing Samus's starship, He could have also been the one to pioneer the proliferation of the X by finding other astrobiological organisms elsewhere. Yet, this didn't happen. This means that it's more likely that Quiet Robe had a degree of control over the X, and there needs to be an explanation as to why. Now that I have refuted two of these hypotheses, I will offer my own. I refer to this as the Kokoro hypothesis. Kokoro is a polysemous word, which is used 8 times in fusion, which may be translated heart, mind, spirit. Of the 8 times it's used, only 4 are relevant here. These are the following instances. Sax is me without a heart. What is the potential of a creature that has no heart, that is merely destructive? The X greedily and accurately copy the appearance, knowledge, and power of their hosts. But they will never copy the soul. While repeating the mistakes caused by these ties, the human soul must eventually find the right answer. You'll notice that 3 of the 4 times Kokoro is used, Samus states that the X and the Sax lack one. The English localization translates these twice as heartless, and twice as soul. Whereas heart, mind, and spirit may be treated distinctly among Western thought, Kokoro is a cohesion of these things. Since an in-depth analysis of Kokoro falls beyond my present scope of this video, I will instead provide a succinct definition given by Eric Thomas Sherlock's 1984 thesis, Kokoro as Ecological Insight, the Concept of Heart in Japanese Literature. Kokoro is defined as an innate capacity for feeling, which is the innermost nature of things with which binds them to each other. What I find interesting here is the phrase, an innate capacity for feeling. While Samus expressed in fusion that the X and the Sax are without Kokoro, the official Japanese Metroid Dread website, under Samus Aran's mission, reveals that the X are without emotions, or have no feelings. This is reiterated again during the opening of Dread. However, the Japanese fusion manual states that the X are hostile toward Samus. Hostility is an aggressive anger, which is an emotional response. The cold X display fear by fleeing from Samus once she's acquired the barrier suit. Again, fear is an emotional response. Thus, to say that the X are without emotions likely refers to their lack of Kokoro. If the X, and especially the Sax lack Kokoro, wouldn't it follow that the parasitized Quiet Robe also lacks Kokoro? After all, after he was infected, not only did he reactivate the Emmy, he also said, "I am counting on you." This seems to suggest that he's referring to the Emmy, rather than Samus. Otherwise, why not utter her name once more? I believe this vagueness was to serve the narrative. Consider these following events. Number 1. Samus's Metroid power briefly flares up in Fernia, but her Metroid power is constant in her starship. Number 2. ME06WB is hidden from the view as it attacks Samus with an electric trap. ME05IM isn't hidden from the view as it's reactivated and freezes an Autul. ME06WB breaks through the Chozo mural and reveals itself before grabbing Samus. ME05IM breaks through the frozen Autul. Both ME are shown moving toward the camera. Number 3. Quiet Robe's appearance is hidden as he quickly deactivates the ME. This camera angle is shot from his right. Yet, the parasitized Quiet Robe's appearance is shown as he slowly reactivates the ME. This shot is angled from his left. Number 4. Quiet Robe is approaching, although he's not in view. Yet, while on Samus's starship, he is shown approaching while in view. Number 5. Samus is sitting and aiming at Quiet Robe, although his appearance isn't in view. Samus is shown once again aiming at the parasitized Quiet Robe, but is standing this time. Again, his appearance isn't in view. In both instances, they're in an enclosed area. Number 6. Quiet Robe stands briefly before placing his left hand onto his chest and bows. He is near the Emmy's own door, which leads out of the area. The parasitized Quiet Robe stands briefly in the starship before placing his left hand onto his chest and bows. He is closer to the starship's exit relative to Samus. Number 7. Quiet Robe and Samus are shown from a side view. Quiet Robe is standing upright on the left, while Samus is sitting on the right. Samus isn't aiming at him. On the starship, Samus and the parasitized Quiet Robe are shown from a side view. Samus is standing on the left, while Quiet Robe is slouched on the right. Samus is aiming at him. Number 8. Quiet Robe says, "I am counting on you, Samus." The parasitized Quiet Robe says, "I am counting on you." Number 9. A flash of light is produced once Quiet Robe is killed by a robot Chozo soldier. A flash of light is also produced once Quiet Robe is infected and reanimated by a Red X. Since there appears to be a sort of visual parallelism, I believe that when the parasitized Quiet Robe said, "I am counting on you," He was speaking to Samus, not the Emmy. I believe the player is intentionally meant to be deceived, much in the same way Ravenbeak was used to deceive the player into thinking that they were interacting with Adam. If Quiet Robe still retained Kokoro, how was this possible? I think the answer lies in the history of the Thoha tribe, but before I present this, I want to first present the way in which Quiet Robe differs from every other X-infected organism that's been shown importance in Fusion and Dread. Consider the following who were infected, but were not the self-same person. These are Samus, the operator, and the Chozo soldier who brought chaos to planet ZDR. When Samus was infected by an X, the medical team removed portions of her power suit. These portions were sent to the BSL, while Samus herself had received the Metroid DNA transplant at the medical facility in the newly established Space Science Academy. In this manner, the SAX was simply a hollow shell of Samus, but not Samus herself. Adam comments on the operator in the main boiler room, stating that it was an X mimicking the operator. Compare this with Quiet Robe's comment, in which he said that the Chozo soldier was an X in disguise. To my knowledge, there's 4 instances where an X-infected organism is its self-same being. These 4 are Box, Nightmare, Quiet Robe, and Ravenbeak. Adam comments about Box, saying, "By the way, Samus, remember the security robot? It seems to have been infected by an X-parasite. This suggests it's the same robot Samus encountered before, and not a copy." Regarding Nightmare, the English localization has Adam say, "We must assume that it's become an X-host," although the Japanese version is less certain with Adam, stating, "Perhaps it is a mimic of X." Both Quiet Robe and Ravenbeak are observed being infected and used with the same body by a red X and a purple X, respectively. Given that Box was a security robot, Nightmare was a semi-mechanical biological weapon developed by the former Galactic Federation Army, and Ravenbeak was the leader of the combative Makan tribe, Quiet Robe's parasitization as a self-same, non-violent Chozo is unique. From the development room on the official Japanese Metroid Zero Mission website, one question was asked. In the manga version, the bird people were supposed to be a non-combatant race, but according to these materials, they are armed and seem to be a combatant race. Yoshio Sakamoto answered, "The bird people were once a race that boasted advanced technology and a high level of fighting ability. However, due to aging and declining fertility caused by long lifespans, their civilization eventually declined and they changed their character to a non-combative race. Since it is known that the Thoha are a non-combative race, this would apply to them and any potential Chozo race who abandon their combative ways. What I find interesting here is that the Thoha were able to change their character from combative to non-combative, but this change might have been a process over time." After the operator attempted to destroy the BSL to deal with Samus, Adam said, "Perhaps, the X's survival instincts have triumphed over its borrowed intelligence. That's my view. In my view, I believe that in Quiet Robe's case, his intelligence triumphed over the X's survival instincts. In order for an X to willingly allow itself to be absorbed by a threat it would otherwise treat with hostility, it would need to do the opposite of survival. It would need to sacrifice itself. This differs from the SAX, who incorrectly allege it sacrificed itself so that Samus might defeat the Omega Metroid. In the case of the parasitized Quiet Robe's sacrifice, this is where I believe Kokoro takes place. Notice Quiet Robe's tendency to place his hand over his chest. In Chozo Memory Number 9, during the time a Gamma Metroid is being guarded off by 2 of the 3 Makan soldiers, Quiet Robe can be seen with his right hand on his chest, similarly to how he places his left hand on his chest when first meeting Samus. According to the paper titled Hand Over Heart Prime's Moral Judgments and Behavior, many cultures associate the gesture of placing a hand on one's heart with honesty. The gesture indicates that one is not bearing arms, or that one appears to have genuine intentions, or is giving one's word of honor, or is pledging allegiance. Compare this with Ravenbeak's hand over heart gesture in Chozo Memory Number 10, where he was secretly bearing arms, and was thus deceptive in his intentions. Nikolaos Bakalis, author of Handbook of Greek Philosophy, From Thales to the Stoics, is cited as noting that since the time of Aristotle, people have believed that the heart is the seat of the human mind, and symbolically it is still used to refer to the emotional or moral core of human beings. Given that the Thoha had long abandoned their violent ways, when Quiet Robe placed his left hand over his heart both times, he exemplified the emotional and moral core of his tribe. It then comes as no surprise for some to have interpreted the parasitized Quiet Robe's action at the end of Dread as a display of his soul. However, and in spite of Kokoro being translated soul twice in Fusion, it's important not to treat the soul and Kokoro as one and the same. As Sherlock states elsewhere, its meaning gradually became generalized and more ethereal, being understood as an expressive impulse latent in creation. It was, in this sense, the source of a poetic instinct thought to be found in every species of being. This universality was somewhat obscured by the fact that the mode of experience of Kokoro was through personal response rather than philosophical elucidation, and thus recognition of Kokoro as a concept akin to the Western idea of soul was historically quite weak and relatively undefined. Only finally under the influence of Zen Buddhist implications of Mushin in the Japanese Middle Ages does the understanding of Kokoro in literature approach something of a metaphysical interpretation. With proponents of the belief that Quiet Robe retained his soul now feeling somewhat justified, what else is there to be said? Recall my analysis of the X as characterized by Adam and Samus. There is a similar treatment with the Metroids. This will serve as another integral part of my analysis. Metroids are described as floating life forms that proliferate when irradiated with beta rays for 24 hours. They are suspected to have destroyed the civilization on SR-388. It would be extremely dangerous to allow them to proliferate unintentionally. Given the circumstance with the space pirates stealing the Metroid from the Federation research ship, if they were able to multiply it and used it as a weapon, galactic civilization would be doomed. After Samus's victory over the Metroid Dread and Mother Brain on planet Zebes, the Federation, taking this incident very seriously, once again sent a survey ship to SR-388. This was because there might be more Metroids that had not been discovered in the previous survey. Once this team had gone to the depths of SR-388, they disappeared. The Federation immediately dispatched a special unit consisting of armed soldiers of the Federation Police to SR-388, and sent them to the depths of the planet. However, they also disappeared after sending only a few documents. The Federation finally confirmed the existence of Metroids while investigating the few survey data they had received from the Federation Police before their disappearance. The Metroids were said to be hiding deep underground in SR-388 and continuing their activities. The rumor spread quickly, and once again the fear of Metroids engulfed the entire galaxy. The Federation held an emergency Supreme Council meeting to hasten to a conclusion. Everyone present had one thought: it was Samus Aran's order to exterminate the Metroids. Having presented a similar characterization between the Metroids and the X, the ending of Dread can now be fully understood. The Federation and Samus believed Metroids were too dangerous, and should become extinct. Adam and Samus believed the same about the X, however, Samus's encounter with the last Metroid, and her last encounter with the X, showed otherwise. Samus's beliefs about the Metroids and the X were challenged by the baby Metroid and the parasitized Quiet Robe. Neither one attacked her, but instead sacrificed themselves for her. When she received the Metroid vaccine, her form was dramatically altered. Yet when she absorbed Quiet Robe in the form of an X, her Metroid suit returned to its more familiar power suit form. In both instances, Samus's life was preserved. The ending of Dread is a parallel to the ending of Metroid 2, Return of Samus, and the parasitized Quiet Robe is akin to the baby Metroid. When Samus thought, the X greedily and accurately copy the appearance, knowledge, and power of their hosts. But they will never copy Kokoro. Quiet Robe's presence and actions prove differently. Within Samus lives the legacy of the baby Metroid, and the X.